Thank you very much, Commissioner Feilding.
Thank you for appearing today and helping us. You said in your testimony that at 9/11 you received information that there was a firearm from a credible source.
Yes.
Can you provide us that credible source?
I don't know who specifically it was. However, in the operations center, not anybody could just call us up and say, we think this is what happened. Any information that came to us had to come from either the airlines or an FAA office or the FBI or some other government agency. It wasn't something that just anybody could access. So I personally don't know where that came from, but any information we had came from a credible source.
Well, help me out a little. You're in a room and you hear that somebody else has received that information?
What we had was just a standard operations center, had 4 walls, and on each wall we had big blocks of the butcher paper where whenever anything of substance came in, we would write that information down on the paper. And then when we were putting together the executive summary, without looking at things politically or using any other filtering process, we just wrote down the facts that we had. And one of them was that a gun was on such and such a flight. And the person also identified the seat where the gun was held by the passenger, and that apparently an individual sitting in front of that seat was shot. And we just reported that.
You remember who wrote it on the butcher paper?
Yes, there was a lady by the name of, not on the butcher paper, but I know who wrote it on the executive summary.
No, but I'm trying to figure out who received the information and wrote it on the butcher paper.
I really don't know.
How many people were in the room?
Between 15 and 20, I would think.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just switch gears here a little. You made reference to the CAP system.
Yes.
And we have not had much testimony about that today, but from your understanding, how did the CAP system operate on 9/11?
We tested CAPS in the red team, and CAPS is one of the most dangerous systems out there. It gives a totally false sense of protection. And the reason is when you look at CAPS from a red team perspective or from a terrorist perspective, the way you look at it is what criteria do I have to use or to apply to this not to be selected as a CAPS selectee. So, and that's fairly easy to do just by flying around a little bit and testing the system and see if you are made a selectee or not based on CAPS. And I really believe that CAPS is the #1 most dangerous system out there because it just totally gives a false sense of security. And CAPS only, I don't know what the percentage is, but like it would make a selectee out of like 10 to 15% of the population of travelers. What that does, it totally eliminates the other 85 to 90% of the people from further selection other than on a random basis. And it's already been demonstrated that terrorists have the capability to do a little research beforehand, and they will find out what it takes not to be made a selectee by CAPS. And now we have CAPS 2, which I'm not familiar with the specifics, but if it's anywhere near the way CAPS 1 was conducted, it simply is a very dangerous system. The single most effective deterrent against aviation-related terrorism is profiling, the way it used to be called, or now a risk assessment that's conducted by a human being in an interview process with the passenger. And that's not something that you can do with every single passenger, but you can certainly weed people out a little bit. But from my red team experience, being interviewed by an experienced profiler or risk assessment person is the biggest deterrent against aviation-related terrorism.
Well, going back to CAPS 1 or whatever it was called at that time, we have reports that 6 of the people, the hijackers, were identified by CAPS.
Right.
So in this case, it didn't eliminate them. They weren't in the other 85% or whatever it is that went on. So it actually identified them. But then where was the breakdown?
Well, that's part of the problem with CAPS. It makes you a selectee, but if all you're doing is going through the regular screening process without an appropriate interview, an in-depth interview, it really doesn't do anything. And I read that there were 9 people that were made selectees as a result of caps, but it's so what? I mean, it had absolutely no impact, and I don't know how much money caps cost. I'm sure it's in the millions of dollars, but it's a totally waste of the money, if not a danger, in my opinion.
If you had to identify a single, well, what would you say was the direct and immediate cause of the 9/11 tragedies? Where was the specific breakdown with this group of hijackers?
The only thing remarkable about what happened on September 11th is how unremarkable their tactics were. And we proved in the red team that the best way to conduct an operation is to keep it as simple as possible. And they didn't even need box cutters. I mean, they could have just walked onto the plane as a regular passenger and taken over the plane. I mean, without any type of weapon, because there's plenty of weapons on a plane you can use anyway. And apparently some of them also had martial arts training also. But as I put in my whistleblower complaint, what happened on September 11th was not a failure of the system. It was a system that was designed for failure. Every single aspect of it did not work to either deter or find terrorists.
I have no further questions. Thank you, sir.